Hello, I'm Adam Ritterspa, and thank you for joining us for another Hop College at Home. We are, like you, unable to hold a Hop College class at the brewery like we normally would, but we thought this would be a cool time to bring a special mini class for you. We actually just recently did our first one on Dortmunder Gold Lager, our flagship. You can find that video on our Facebook page in the video section. But today, our topic is IPAs, India Pale Ales, one of the hottest styles in craft right now. We'll be discussing Commodore Perry IPA, Great Lakes IPA, Chill Wave Double IPA, and our newest limited release beer, Hazy IPA. We invite you to crack open a bottle of your favorite Great Lakes IPA and join us as we talk about the background, some of the history, and the tasting notes of our hoppiest beers. If you don't have a beer with you, we just want to let you know that our brew pub is still open. That includes the gift shop. We are offering a brewery delivery and to-go service in the Cleveland area. You can find all of that information on our website. Or if you're outside of the Cleveland area, you can always track down some of our beer on your next beer run at greatlakesbrewing.com/beer-finder. Joining me today, all the way, way far away from Cleveland, is Brad Mineski. Brad was a former brewer in Pennsylvania before joining us at Great Lakes, where he is now the market manager for Eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey. How you doing, Brad?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Brad, where are you calling in from today?
Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Okay, excellent. Well, we're super happy to have you. Brad, you are a wealth of knowledge. I'm really excited to get into this about IPAs. Tell us a little bit about what you do with the company.
So I've got the privilege to service Eastern Pennsylvania and the state of New Jersey for the brewery, meaning I call on our wholesaler and distributor partners as well as our retail accounts, kind of just making sure there's no roadblock in getting our beer into our customers' hands. So
great. Well, once things get back to normal, we are going to be going back to having plenty of Hop College classes back at our brewery. You can find all of this information about all of the events we do at greatlakesbrewing.com/events. If you have any questions throughout this video, we're not streaming live, but we will answer them. Just shoot a message in the comments section or shoot us a message in the direct messages. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. With that out of the way, Brad, you want to crack open an IPA?
Twist my arm.
All right, man. I think I'm going to go with the Great Lakes IPA. Is that what you're going for?
I've got one handy, yeah.
All right, man. That's perfect. This is, for those of you at home, Great Lakes IPA is our newest year-round IPA, so you can find that right now. I'm going to get in a little taster glass. Lovely. Brad, cheers, buddy.
Cheers. A couple hundred miles away.
That's right. Now, Brad, India Pale Ales have a rich history. And since this is a Hop College at Home kind of mini class, we're not going to get really into all of the nuts and bolts. We'll do that on a real class when we get back to it. But there's been a pretty big misconception that we hear a lot about India Pale Ales and how they came to be. So why don't you clear the air?
Sure.
Were India Pale Ales created specifically to last the long journey from Britain to India? Is that true?
So the short answer is no. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's hard because, there's a lot of minutia in the entire history of the story of the advent, so to speak. But the short answer is it wasn't particularly formulated or invented to last the trip. It's kind of a story of evolution of some beer styles. Started with, we're the East India Trading Company and the Bow Brewing Company, kind of inking a deal with the East India to ship their beer to the, the British settlers in East India. So that kind of turned into getting them their porter and a beer called October beer that they had been drinking. So it's really more an evolution of October beer becoming a little more pale, a little more hop forward, and kind of more so to the tastes of the drinkers in India. So
now, October beer, is this the same as like the Oktoberfest we know today?
No. So actually, October beer is it's a pale to amber, well hopped. It would be closer to like an old ale of today's standards.
Okay. Got it.
High alcohol.
All right, got it. Okay.
Beginning, yeah.
So now one thing that I've always found fascinating about beer origins and how styles come to be is how many of them have developed based on the circumstances that brewers were either facing or just what ingredients were available to them at the time.
Sure.
How does that connect to IPAs?
So yeah, I mean, we talk about probably the most famous brewer of the IPA being George Hodgson at the Bow Brewery. Not getting into all the details of what happened, but eventually a little area called Burton-on-Trent kind of became the hub of IPA brewing and beer export to India. And what was really interesting there is where Hodgson was the first and was kind of the commodity. When it went to Burton-on-Trent, it was actually interesting because they started realizing they had pretty perfect water chemistry in their natural wells. It's high in calcium sulfate. So that does two things. The calcium actually lowers the pH, which kind of lets the beer become a little crisper, drier, clarifies better. The yeast and everything else in the beer flocculates out a little better, which makes it better for travel and better for overall consumption. And then the sulfate actually specific to IPAs is especially important because what that does to the water chemistry is really lets the hops shine. So you get more crisper hops and just overall better beer.
You know, it's interesting. I feel like many people don't realize just how important water is to brewing and how depending on the chemistry of it will kind of change how the flavor or aroma is.
Yeah, and if you look up, there's a term Burtonize. So a lot of brewers, to get that nice IPA water chemistry, will actually Burtonize their water, kind of making it the same water profile as what you would have found back in Burton-on-Trent.
Wow. So you mentioned that the sulfates helped kind of elevate the hop character. For those at home that maybe aren't too familiar or kind of new to craft beer, explain briefly what hops are.
So hops, yeah, I mean, especially to an IPA, hops are the soul of the beer, right? Not to diminish the importance of a nice malt backbone, but when you're talking IPAs, the hops are the lead singer. So, they're essentially a coned flour, bitter flour. Beer, the back history of beer, I mean, was bittered with anything from heather to any other herb or botanical, but they really landed on the hops for a number of reasons. And it's essentially looks like a pine cone, green, leafy, softer. And then inside there, you got the lupulin, which is essentially just a nice treasure chest of oils and resinous, delicious, aromatic, tasty, bitterness to combat the sweetness of the wort in a beer.
Yeah, that lupulin, it almost reminds me of like the pollen of like a normal flower you might see. It's kind of that yellowish golden color.
Yeah.
But that's where all the oils are then, huh?
Sure, yeah. Whenever you if anyone's ever got hops out to kind of like display when you're doing anything educational for beer, you always see people going like that and giving a nice smell. And what that does is kind of release those oils and the aromatics and all that to give you a better idea what that hop's going to do to the beer.
And so the hops are mostly for flavor and aroma in an IPA and beers in general, correct?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, traditionally speaking, there's like 3 hop additions, 4 actually with an IPA. So beginning of the boil, middle of the boil, end of the boil bring 3 different qualities to the beer. The beginning can, really kind of trap in that bitterness, keep the nice high alpha acid in the beer, IBU. The middle is going to be more of the kind of flavor on the palate. And then obviously at the end, the least amount of boiling is going to have more upfront, very aromatic. And then obviously with IPAs, dry hopping, hop backs, whirlpooling is huge because that just leaves the hop even more volatile and all that. So it's just a matter of isomerization. If you want to look up a little technical word, it's essentially, using either heat or alcohol to be a solvent and taking the oils and making them into a liquid form to stay within the beer.
That's great. If you're just now joining us, I'm Adam Rittersbaum from Great Lakes Brewing Company. Joining me is Brad Mineski, and we're talking all about IPAs today. Brad, before we really start to dive into our beers that we produce, all the different IPAs we do, tell us a little bit, let's jump ahead in the history on kind of how the craft beer revolution in America really has helped elevate the style IPA.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so eventually, pale ales, IPAs kind of dried up in popularity around the world with the advent of, refrigeration. That's when lagers got really popular. And so throughout history, for a good chunk of time, IPAs kind of disappeared. Enter America, USA. When, the 1978, I believe it was, where home brewing was really legalized in the States. And that's when, you know, a lot of, you know, passionate beer fans were able to really test their chops at brewing and digging back into these historic styles like IPA. So, you know, around the 80s, you start seeing it come up. And then by the 1990s, IPA is just like rocketing into the most popular style of craft beer. So, yeah.
Great. And it has since really taken hold, and it really is, in terms of,
Yeah.
if you had to just say one style, it is the king of kings for craft beer right now.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that what lends itself to that is it's the bitterness, whether people believe it or not. Actually, in hot weather, it's a really refreshing quality in a beer. And obviously the dryness of an IPA, you know, it doesn't leave any residual sugars kind of cloying on your palate too much. It's a perfect thirst quencher. It's also ripe for experimentation. It's got a pretty blank palate, and the hops kind of can pair up with some citrus and any other, you know, adjunct ingredients. So, you know, it's a really fun beer to play with as a brewer. So I think that probably makes sense.
Well, we are, of course, producing 2 year-round IPAs right now. Also in the market, we have 2 seasonal IPAs. And I think what's interesting about this is some people will go, man, 4 IPAs, I mean, do they taste the same? Tell us a little bit about, since IPA has gotten so popular, what's kind of happened with the style in terms of subcategories and whatnot?
So yeah, I mean, just on my own experience, after the brewing side, getting into sales, it was crazy. Like maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago, going into an account and talking about what their beer program looks like and what they're looking for. And, you know, maybe I'd be talking about an IPA that day, and they'd be like, oh, I've got an IPA. You know, they've got one IPA on draft. So now you go into a place a couple of years later, almost a decade later, and 8, 9, 10 IPAs could be on tap. So, I mean, yeah, and really lends itself to the different styles and subcategories that are out there. And I think the 4 we're talking about today run a really, really cool gamut of that. Like you have our Great Lakes IPA, which is really nice, light-bodied, kind of more modern hops, bring a little more of a citrus stone fruit to the equation. Our Commodore Perry, which is more of a, harkens back to English-style IPA, has a little more bones in the malt bill, has a little more classic hop content to it, a little more of that kind of spicy, earthy bite on the hop bill. Obviously going into the hazy, which is the newest subcategory, the craziest subcategory right now. You know, starting with all those New England brewers that were getting into, not to go too deep into the hazy style, but, you know, the oats and the biotransformation and the hop additions and stuff. So then you go into the doubles. Chill Wave's a classic example of a double IPA where, you know, it's essentially taking what we brought back as an IPA, and Americans as we do, doubling it and making it more aggressive, more aromatic, more flavorful, just kind of just pushing the envelope in a way.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there are Belgian IPAs, black IPAs, rye IPAs, fruited IPAs, IPAs made with champagne yeast. I mean, the list goes on and on. So what do you say, we've already cracked open the Great Lakes IPA. Shall we kind of talk a little bit about the background behind the beer and why we call it Great Lakes IPA and stuff like that?
Sure.
Great.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, obviously, if anyone doesn't know, 2018, I believe it was, we turned 30 as a brewery. And at our annual summit, Pat and Dan were generous enough and amazing enough to bless us all to be employee owners. So we, the year later, kind of dedicated our new IPA to being, you know, the family of employee owners, and just kind of celebrating all the different departments, exactly on the label, celebrating different departments and all the different personalities that make our company tick. So you got Steve Foreman right there. I got him here in case I need to ask him any questions about some of the. He loves being on that. He loves it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's honestly, I think it's a subcategory of IPA that we were ripe to have in our portfolio. Obviously, Commodore Perry is a classic, brand for us. It does really well for us. But the flavor, the tastes of the modern IPA drinker are really calling for that lighter body and the more modern hops that kind of give a little more of a citrus, fruit forward kind of element.
Yeah, I mean, there's no mistaking that this is a hop forward beer. You still get some of those malt characteristics, but again, the body, like you said, is so light, and there's just enough bitterness that it invites you to just keep taking another sip and another sip. I mean, it's lovely.
And obviously, not to get too geeky, but there is something really cool and interesting about this beer, which is the cryogenic kind of processing. We got a Mosaic cryo hop. So cryo, obviously, you know, like you're thinking, you know, liquid nitrogen freezing, which is, you're on point. It's you taking the actual hop cone, getting it to be a certain temperature to where it's easy to kind of decant the essential oils from the vegetal material, giving you way more of just a, you know, pungent pop of hop flavor, and leaves behind a little bit of that organic kind of vegetal material. So
Yeah, it's like a super concentrated, right?
exactly, yeah.
How would you say this is a very American take on IPAs, correct? And that's with the hops we use, right? I mean, you talked
Absolutely,
a
yeah.
little bit about the cryo mosaic. What are some of those other hops that we have?
So yeah, I guess more of a classic one would be the Simcoe, nice American hop. I imagine we use that a lot for the bittering, and then we get into some more kind of new breeds with the Azaka and the Lemon Drop, and obviously the Mosaic, like we talked about, kind of bringing those really, really bolstering, fruity kind of stone fruit, citrus elements to it. And that's probably my favorite part about it, is the nose just explodes with all that aromatic. So.
And those fruity kind of flavors that you just described, that is what's signature to American hops, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And
Yep.
What's been interesting, I find fascinating, is as IPAs have gotten more and more popular and as hops have gotten more and more important in brewing, there have been all of these new experimental hops that seem to come out. Gosh, it's like every other month, it seems like.
Sure.
Just keep pushing the envelope on these kind of flavors. So really exciting stuff.
Yeah, you see all these experiments come by, and some of them will stick. Like, there's always new experimental ones that seem to be in all of the kind of up-and-coming breweries. But then, you know, every once in a while, you just get those ones that just become part of the classic fold. Like, I think Mosaic and Citrus have some staying power. So
absolutely. You see more and more brewers using Lemon Drop. I know our brewers love using Azaka as well. Very exciting stuff. So Great Lakes IPA is available year-round. It's a great IPA. You can find it anywhere you find our year-round beers. But our original IPA, which came out in the, I believe, early to mid-90s, early 90s.
I know we definitely entered into some competition in 1992 and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if it was in our distribution portfolio at that time, but yeah, we've been brewing it for a while.
Is Commodore Perry IPA. This is also our other year-round IPA. And I'm so excited to crack this open and drink it next to Great Lakes IPA because, to me, both are very hoppy, but they are very different beers.
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely interesting to try these two side by side, and that really does kind of speak to the difference. I mean, when you say IPA, it's not a cookie cutter, right? I mean, every brewer is able to take their interpretation and their personal preference and maybe what they're trying to give their customer and put their own twist on it.
So tell us a little bit about who Commodore Perry was and why we named him that, or our beer that, rather.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're familiar with our brewery, we are big on storytelling. Pat and Dan are very big on, especially the local area, kind of hearkening all the stories back to the Northeast Ohio area as best we can, or the Lake region as best we can. So, yeah, Commodore Perry makes a ton of sense for us to have a beer named after. He was the hero of Lake Erie. He won some really pivotal battles in the War of 1812, which this isn't a history episode, but I mean, you talk about the Revolutionary War, and I mean, 1812 kind of gets on the back burner, but that was where we kind of had to defend our title. So,
right, and he had amazing sideburns. Let's not kid ourselves.
That he did, yes. He actually, maybe I'll post a photo of him side by side with my college roommate. It's uncanny.
That's great. Of course, we always like to have a little fun too with some of our storytelling. Commodore Perry famously yelled out, "Don't give up the ship," to which we have adopted, "Don't give up the sip."
That's not.
So tell us a little bit then about what you can expect when you're drinking a beer like Commodore Perry IPA.
So yeah, specifically going from the Great Lakes IPA into the Commodore Perry, I think the most noticeable thing is the balance kind of from the malt side to the hops. So you could just see the colors there. It's a little darker. Where in the Great Lakes IPA, I believe we only use our 2-row. And with the Commodore Perry, we actually use some caramel malt, some C30, I think. So you definitely get a little more,
I mean,
Get a little
here's
more color.
Great Lakes IPA, and then here's the Commodore Perry. I mean, there is a distinct difference, and you can tell the Commodore just by the color. It's probably going to be a little bit fuller in body.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, after appearance, you go right to the nose. And where with Great Lakes IPA, it's all really fruit, citrus, stone fruit. You go to this and you kind of get more of that earthy, spicy, maybe a little bit of orange peel or bitter orange peel. You can get it. I mean, it's really, everyone's going to smell or taste something different. You get like such a different hop quality out of this one.
And so the more American modern hops are going to give you that more like intense fruit, citrus, grapefruit, maybe some pine.
Yep.
The kind of more classic hop varietals are going to be a little bit more earthy, spicy. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see the difference tasting these beers side by side. You realize, wow, if these are just both considered IPAs, there's kind of a whole canvas of what these flavors can be. Really fantastic.
Yeah, all four of these, you line them up, they're going to look like they're completely different monsters, and they all fall into some category of India Pale Ale.
Yes, yes. And don't forget, if you're watching at home, both of those beers are available year-round now. You can find those beers using our beer finder, greatlakesbrewing.com/beer-finder. If you have any questions too, shoot us a message in the comments or shoot us a message. We are happy to answer those. So, okay, we've covered our 2 year-round IPAs. The classic, hey, here's the American kind of more modern take, and then here was kind of our OG Commodore Perry. Let's start getting into some of those subcategories we talked about, and what is probably the hottest version of IPA right now is what we're talking about, the hazy IPA. There it is.
Love the flamingo.
Yes, very inspired by Parma, Ohio. Have you ever been to Parma, Brad?
Parma. You know what? My aunt talked about going to get frozen yogurt there or custard or something like that.
Sounds about right. Yeah. You got it. Next time you're in Cleveland, you got to stop by. There's some great pierogi and food around there. And of course, all of the pink flamingos that we have as a little nod to our friends down south. Brad, tell us a little bit about the limited release series and hazy IPAs and kind of why they're so popular right now.
So yeah, specifically the limited release series. It's really exciting to see all the different innovation we're coming out with this year. This kind of kicking it off. Sorry about the heady pour there. But yeah, the hazy IPA kicking it off. I'm a big fan of Hefeweizen, so to see the lemon Hefeweizen in our plans was huge for me. Smash IPA.
Announcing soon. Very exciting.
Yeah, so then, the hazy, that's obviously, I mean, for years and years, you've been seeing that come up. I would say early 2010s is really when those hazies were starting to kind of like pick up some fan base. And you're starting to see people kind of like Burt Reynoldsing them down here, like Smokey and the Bandit, over state borders and stuff. So
sure.
Now everyone's kind of brewing their own. And like I said, I think the hazy IPA really comes down to 3 different qualities. Obviously, it's in the name, hazy. You're going to use some oats. You're going to use some wheat. You're going to use, something to get that nice and kind of opaque. And that sensory-wise, lends itself to like a really full body and mouthfeel. The hops, like you were saying, it really comes down to the variety of hops. It's going to be all American or New World experimental hops in here. And then lastly, on the technical side, what you do during the process of fermentation. So the hop addition during the boil, okay, it's pretty normal. Some dry hopping probably occurs, but the biggest thing is dry hopping during active fermentation at what's called a high kreuzen. So what that does is introduce the hop oils to active yeast, and something called biotransformation happens there, and essentially just kind of, not to get, I don't even know how to explain it, but essentially something new other than just solventing the hop oils from the hop cone happens to give you these just unheard of, otherwise unexperienced flavors from the hops.
Wow, yeah. And I mean, you were kind of mentioning the mouthfeel. It's fuller, but I wouldn't describe it as heavy.
No, not at all. And that's something, if you look, I think it was 2015-ish, where 2018, 2015, where this was actually officially added to the BJCP beer style. And it's very, very, it's very careful in making sure that anything hazy isn't a New England IPA. And it kind of doesn't really encourage calling things with all that much adjunct and nonsense kind of going on.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a very fluid style right now, and so they're kind of reining it in, and it's interesting to kind of see it come into its own, especially as such a hot seller.
Now, because hazy IPAs tend to use dry hopping so much, which brings out a lot of the aromatics, correct?
Yes.
That means adding hops so late into the brewing process means the bittering is going to be down a little bit, correct?
Yeah, that's definitely a characteristic of the New England IPAs. I believe the IBUs are supposed to be at their highest in the 50-60 range.
And IBU stands for?
International Bitterness Units.
That's right. Good stuff.
And it's important. It's actually, yeah, I mean, so like that is the actual equation of alpha acids into a beer. Mm-hmm. But then it's also important to think about it, especially with this style of beer, having all of that malt present and wheat and oat present. There becomes the question of perceived bitterness. So the amount of alpha acid going in there is one thing, but the amount that actually shines through all of that, increased mouthfeel is another story.
Yeah, and hazy IPA is 40 IBUs. Our Great Lakes IPA, which is that kind of more modern, is 50 IBUs, so a little bit more bitter. But then, our Commodore Perry is at 70 IBUs. So do you think that's kind of been a trend with more modern IPAs, that the IBUs tend to be a little bit lower?
Yeah, I think so. It was something you always hear is that hoppy doesn't mean bitter, right?
Right.
So that was the big thing 10 some years ago, whereas the more bitter, the better. Yeah. Pushing the envelope, wrecking your palate and all that. And now I think people are more after the subtleties of what a hop can be and the aromatics and the flavor. Right. And that's why you're seeing a lot of the citrus forward, stone fruit, tropical fruit, stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's really what the modern drinker's after is more so the flavor and what the hop can bring to the table from a sensory point of view than just kind of being crushingly bitter.
Yeah, I think if you're watching this at home and you're thinking to yourself, man, IPAs, they're just way too bitter for me, I would absolutely recommend at least giving hazy IPA a shot, because it is much softer and yet still not sweet, or it's just very fruity. It's lovely.
It's actually, and even I would bring it back to Commodore Perry. That is a beer, if I'm doing tastings or if I'm at a beer festival or anything like that, somebody asks what I have, and if it's Commodore Perry, I don't like IPAs, and I usually insist that they at least give it a sip, just because it's so balanced, and there is that really, that song, that dance between the hops and the malt. So that's definitely, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So hazy IPA, we're going, it's cloudy, very, very fruit forward. Let's kind of take a step back to one of our now really kind of classic seasonals that really has developed a bit of a cult following. It's our Chill Wave Double IPA, another subcategory, but also a wildly popular subcategory for IPAs too.
Absolutely.
Fred, what exactly is a double? What's an Imperial IPA? Are they different? Are they the same thing?
I'm pretty sure double IPA and Imperial are just two different ways of saying the same thing. So
I think you're right.
It's essentially just the IPA, what you like about that, and just kind of double it up.
Yeah, right, yep. So what can you expect with a double IPA then?
Excuse me?
What can you expect with a double IPA? What makes it different from a regular IPA, let's say?
So yeah, typically you're going to kind of get you're going to back off the kind of malt presence, and you're really just going to increase a lot of the hops. Obviously, there's more malt in it to get more alcohol, but usually it's a little higher attenuated. Mm-hmm. And then the aromatics, the IBU, everything just goes through the roof. So that's what I was talking about with people who are kind of seeking to push the envelope as far as IBUs and stuff. I think we're sitting at 80 with Chill Wave, if I'm correct.
80 IBUs, yeah, that's correct.
Which isn't crazy, and what I guess what's always said is the human palate can't really discern anything past 100. So 80 sits in a really comfortable spot, I think.
Sure. And what I've always liked about Chill Wave Double IPA is, even though that bitterness is high, 80 IBUs, the malt does a lot for the style and for the Chill Wave itself. Tell us a little bit about that.
So yeah, if you're not familiar, one of the malts in this beer is called the honey malt. And so obviously that brings a really nice balance of malt sweetness. And, the hops that we chose for this beer, which plays really, really nice off the sweetness of a honey, is we got Mosaic, Nugget, and Cascade. So that's a really great hop build to go against like that really earthy sweetness from a honey malt.
And hold that snifter up for the camera just a little bit, because I love the color of Chillwave.
I almost never use this snifter, too, because I'm afraid I'm going to break it. Speaking of 30th anniversary, Pat and Dan gave us these Just a Wee ones.
Just a Wee ones, yes. Yes, celebrate 30 years of Great Lakes. Yep, classic. But what a rich color that beer is. I mean, it's full.
Yeah. Visually, it's hard to beat. When you say honey malt and look at this, you're thinking you're about to take down a less viscous glass of honey with some hops in it. It's delicious.
Right. So double the hops, double the malt, let's say, for a double IPA. Sure. You've already mentioned that the IBUs, at least the beers that we've tasted today, it's the highest. What does that also do then for the ABV?
So the IBU and the ABV are pretty mutually exclusive. It's really the amount of malt that goes in here that brings the ABV up. Using more of those starches, turning into simple sugars, allowing for fermentation and all that. That's what really gets you that 9% ABV. And then what you got to do there is kind of just consider all of the malt you just used and use enough hops to kind of shine through. So yeah, it's more of a gravity versus IBU situation. So the viscousness and the sweetness of this beer needs to be matched, and plus some with IBUs and the hop content.
Yeah, we usually release Chillwave in the kind of late winter, early spring, depending on our calendar year and everything. This is definitely a beer that if you're wanting to warm up a little bit, the ABV will do that. But also, I love the tropical flavor that it brings.
Sure.
I mean, just so much. Every time I drink it, I just think sticky, ripe fruit. That's what I always think.
Sticky's the first thing I go for. It's definitely got that sticky, like orange, like you just peel an orange with your hands.
Yes.
Sticky citrus. It's amazing.
Yes. Now, Brad, I'm curious. Have you witnessed personally, let's say, the inspiration by why we call it Chillwave? Have you ever been in Cleveland and seen it for yourself?
I have not seen it for myself. I've seen video, and obviously the label, sets the perfect tone to what it may look like, maybe dramatic, but yeah.
Yeah, so then I will gladly explain, because I've gone down there and seen it. I think it's so cool. For those at home that don't know this, Chillwave is named after and inspired by the very passionate yet small surfing community that the Great Lakes region has, and that includes right here in Cleveland and Lake Erie. You will see from about October all the way into April, depending on how the winds are and how the lake is, die-hard surfers surfing on Lake Erie. Yes. And we think that's such a cool story that's where our inspiration for Chillwave Double IPA, the name, came from in the artwork. So pretty cool.
It's like a surf-forward polar bear club.
That's awesome. Right, yes. I am glad to just watch it from the shore. I love it. I'm not about to get in there. So, Brad, I did have one more question for you. Well, two, actually. The first is, one thing that's very popular among people right now that drink craft beer is they will get their favorite styles and they will stock up on them so that they can drink them all year long. And that's all well and good. But tell me why that's maybe not the best idea for an IPA.
Yeah, specific to IPAs, there's really two reasons. One is universal for all beers. The other one is specific to IPAs. Yeah. The two main ingredients for beers, especially sensory-wise, would be that malt and the hops. So malt, after a certain amount of time, starts to break down and oxidize, which kind of brings a unpleasant wet cardboard flavor to the equation, which I'm not really a big fan of.
You don't like cardboard?
Yeah, so yeah, it's definitely a very pungent kind of just, papery, awful experience. But then, then on the hop side, hops are, those essential oils tend to fall out and kind of just really not have the punch that they would have if they were fresher.
Yeah.
And I think specifically for our brewery, we're very cognizant of that. And that's why we have, we were one of the first to put the dates on the bottle. And so, yeah, when you're shopping, make sure, you're getting the freshest product. And for those two reasons, especially.
Yeah, if you always look on the side of the bottle, we have a freshness date printed on the side, and we want you to be drinking the freshest beer possible. Look, it's a free country. You are welcome to stock up on them and age them as much as you like. But we recommend for an IPA to drink it as fresh as possible because it's usually the hops that go first, correct?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, Brad, this was my final question. Then we drank 4 beers, 2 of them year-round, 2 of them seasonal. What would you say is your everyday go-to beer?
I love the history of the Commodore Perry.
Uh-huh.
I love the boundary pushing of the chill wave.
Yeah.
I'm excited to have the hazy in our portfolio. That Great Lakes IPA, when we made that, that just became my favorite beer probably ever.
Yeah.
It's just such an easy drinker. It brings a lot of flavor to the table. Perfect 6.5. It's nothing too much on the ABV side. It's 100%. If I'm on a tropical island and I can pick one beer, if I'm on that's definitely going to be the Great Lakes IPA.
Yes. I will always have a soft spot for Commodore Perry with tacos. IPAs are great with spicier food. If I'm looking for that balanced kind of beer, I'm going Commodore Perry. But I'm with you, Bill. Great Lakes IPA, especially in the summer. I cannot wait to slam some more of these when it gets hot out again. So easy to drink. Brad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, man. Awesome. Yeah, it's been awesome.
What's not to love? Drinking some IPAs at home, talking about beer. I love it, buddy. If you have any questions at home, please leave a comment, shoot us a message. Again, this isn't streaming live, but we will try to answer those as best as we can. Don't forget to try out our beer finder. It's available on our website. And remember, we are delivering beer. That's crowlers, kegs, bottles, cans. We'll deliver it from our gift shop if you're in the Cleveland area. You can find all of that information at greatlakesbrewing.com. I'm Adam. Brad, cheers, buddy.
Cheers.
All right. Take care, everybody.